The key to silence. The alley reeked of stale rain and something metallic. Elara pressed herself against the cold brick, her breath a jagged white cloud in the pre-dawn air. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this city, and certainly not at the end of this dead-end street. But the letter had been clear, its edges brittle and scorched as if it had traveled through fire. The key is in the silence, it had read. A nonsensical phrase that had haunted her dreams for a week. The silence was the problem. It was too complete. The usual distant hum of the city, the clang of a tram, the wail of a siren, all of it was gone. Only the soft drip of water from a broken gutter broke the stillness. A shadow shifted at the far end of the alley, a shape that was too tall, too thin to be a person. She gripped the worn leather satchel at her side, her knuckles white. Inside, a small, silver compass pulsed with a faint, blue light. It was the only thing she had left of her father, and it was spinning wildly, pointing not to north, but to the shadow itself. Elara knew she should run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to turn and sprint back to the safety of the main street. But the compass, the silent city, and the chilling promise of that scorched letter held her in place. The shadow detached itself from the wall, and the silence broke with a sound that was like glass shards grinding together. Whatever it was not human, and it was coming for her. A gust of wind, smelling of ozone and wet stone, whipped through the alley, extinguishing the blue light of the compass. Elara gasped, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The shadow stopped, a mere 10 feet away. It was a humanoid shape, but its limbs were unnaturally long, and where a face should have been, there was only a shimmering void, a space where light itself seemed to be consumed. She fumbled for the small, carved piece of obsidian in her pocket, her fingers slick with sweat. Her father had given it to her on her 10th birthday, a bizarre gift she had never understood. "Hold this when the world goes quiet," he'd said, a strange, haunted look in his eyes. The grinding sound came again, louder this time, as if 1,000 gears were turning without oil. The creature raised a hand that was more bone than flesh, pointing a long, skeletal finger directly at her satchel. It wasn't interested in her, it was after the compass. "No," she whispered, a fierce defiance surging through her. The compass was all she had left. It was a direct line to a past she was just beginning to understand, a key to a secret her father had died protecting. The creature took a step forward, its feet making no sound on the wet pavement. Elara closed her eyes, clutching the obsidian. The cold stone was suddenly warm, and a strange, humming vibration ran up her arm. When she opened her eyes, the world was tinted in shades of gray. The city, the alley, even the creature, all were muted, flat. But the compass in her hand was a brilliant, pulsating blue, and the obsidian was a deep, fiery red. The creature, however, was now a pale, transparent silhouette, and for the first time, she could see a faint, glowing inscription on its chest. An intricate, swirling symbol she had seen only once before, in a dusty, forbidden book in her father's study. A symbol of the weavers. The letter's nonsensical phrase, "The key is in the silence," now echoed with a new meaning. The silence wasn't the absence of sound, but the absence of the world as she knew it. The obsidian had not made the world quiet. It had made her see what was truly there, hiding in plain sight. The creature lunged, its skeletal hand reaching for the compass. But Elara was no longer afraid. She took a step forward herself, her own hand outstretched, the red-hot obsidian a shield. She didn't know what it did, but she was about to find out. She was tired of running. She met its lunge not with a strike, but with a silent, resolute push of her hand. The obsidian flared, and a wave of crimson energy pulsed outward, not as a concussive force, but as a ripple that seemed to unravel the creature. It didn't explode or shatter. Instead, its form began to fray at the edges. Like a thread pulled from a tapestry, The luminous symbol on its chest flickered and dimmed. The grinding sound softened into a low, mournful hum, and then, with a final shudder, the creature unwove itself entirely, fading into a cloud of shimmering motes that vanished on the wind. The world rushed back in with a jolt of sensory overload. The smell of rain, the distant siren, the cold of the alley wall against her back. The blue light of the compass returned, steady now, its needle no longer spinning wildly, but pointing with unwavering precision toward a crack in the brick wall near the now empty space where the creature had been. Elara's hand was still hot, the obsidian now just a cool, inert stone in her palm. The truth of her father's words settled over her. He had not given her a weapon, but a lens, a tool to see what was hidden, to separate the reality of the world from the illusions that preyed upon it. The weavers, as he had called them in his mad notebooks, were beings that existed on a different frequency, cloaked from the senses of ordinary humans. They had been trying to get to the compass, but for what purpose, she still didn't know. She looked at the small, narrow crack the compass pointed to. It was too small for anything to fit through, but as she reached for it, she noticed a faint, cool draft coming from within. She pressed her hand against the wall, a different kind of curiosity now replacing the fear. The brick shifted with a soft click, and a small section swung inward, revealing a dark, musty void. A single, leather-bound journal rested on a ledge just inside, its cover bearing the same stylized symbol as the one on the creature. The same symbol as the one in her father's study. The same symbol as the one on the scorched letter. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down her spine. The weavers had been after the compass, but this journal, this was the trail. The questions she had carried for so long were no longer just mysteries. They were a path, and she had just found its beginning. She took a deep breath, slipped the journal into her satchel, and stepped into the hidden space, leaving the familiar world behind. The small space behind the wall was a vault of still, dead air. Elara's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a cavern no larger than a small closet. It was lined with more of the same intricate, swirling symbols, carved into the stone itself. The symbols pulsed with a faint, internal light, a soft, purplish glow that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The journal felt impossibly heavy in her hands, a weight of secrets passed down through generations. She flipped through its pages. The script was her father's neat, spidery hand, but the language was something else entirely. It was not English, nor any other language she knew. It was a series of symbols and geometric shapes, almost like sheet music for an alien symphony. And yet, she understood it. The obsidian in her pocket was not just a lens for sight, but a key for comprehension. The symbols on the page translated in her mind into concepts, feelings, and images. The journal was a history, not of people, but of frequencies. It spoke of a world that was a complex web of vibrations, a reality layered on top of another. Her father had called the beings weavers because they could manipulate these frequencies, pulling apart the fabric of reality to suit their own ends. The compass, she now understood, was a tuning fork designed to resonate with the specific frequency of a location her father had called the nexus. It was a place where the barrier between worlds was at its thinnest, a doorway that the weavers were desperate to open. A soft, rhythmic thrumming began to emanate from the walls, and the purple light intensified, casting the room in a dizzying array of shadows. The symbols on the walls pulsed in time with the thrumming, as if the space itself was coming to life. Elara realized with a jolt that the vault was not just a hiding place. It was a receiver. The compass, and by extension, she, had just activated it. A voice, not from the room, but from within her own mind, spoke. It was a gentle sound, like the whisper of wind through chimes, and it was filled with sorrow. He tried to hide it, little one, but you have brought it home. Elara froze. The voice was not hostile, but it was filled with an ancient, profound sadness. It was the voice of the weavers, but not the one that had attacked her. It was a different frequency, a different layer of their existence. She clutched the journal, her heart pounding. The journal was not a history, but an invitation. She had not found the beginning of a path. She had just stepped into the middle of a conflict she was not prepared to fight. The silence in the alley had been an illusion, a lie to draw her in. Now, the music had begun, and she was standing in the center of the stage. "You are not a weaver," the voice in her mind continued, a sound like glass beads shifting. "You are of the fractured." A resonance in the silence, a mistake of the loom. Elara's mind reeled. Fractured? Loom? The journal fell from her grasp, landing with a soft thud on the stone floor. It was a history, yes, but it was also a warning. Her father had not just studied the weavers. He had been trying to hide from them, to separate himself and his lineage from their control. He had used the compass to sever their connection to the nexus, to cut off their ability to manipulate the world's reality. The journal's pages, once clear, now blurred and shifted into a dizzying kaleidoscope of shapes. The humming intensified, and the purple light from the symbols on the walls began to pulse faster, creating a strobe-like effect that made the room swim around her. Her head began to ache, a sharp, piercing pain that felt like a needle being threaded through her skull. "The loom is broken, little one," the voice whispered, its tone now laced with a desperate sadness. "And you, the resonant thread, must be rewoven." A pattern of light began to form on the wall opposite her, a complex, three-dimensional projection of a swirling vortex of energy. At its center was a single, tiny point of brilliant blue, the compass, or at least a representation of it. The vortex was the nexus, and the compass was the key that locked it. The weavers were not trying to open it to manipulate reality. They were trying to mend it. And the voice in her head was not her enemy. It was a desperate plea for help. Elara's fear transformed into a cold, terrifying clarity. The creature that had attacked her, the weaver that had pursued her, was not a being but a tool, a construct, like a spider's thread, sent to retrieve the compass. The voice in her mind was the true weaver, a living, sentient being that existed on a different plane, trapped and in pain. Her father had sealed the nexus, not to save the world, but to imprison this being. "I don't understand," she thought, her words silent but strong. "He was trying to save me, to save our world." The voice responded with a mournful sigh. "He saved you from me, yes, but he condemned us both to loneliness. The fractured cannot thrive, and the loom cannot heal without its resonant thread. You and the compass are the last of the key. You must undo what he has done." The vortex on the wall swirled faster. She saw a glimmer of another world within its depths, a place of unimaginable light and sound, of pure, harmonious energy. It was a beautiful and terrifying sight. She felt a magnetic pull toward it, a longing she couldn't explain. She was faced with an impossible choice: honor her father's desperate, misguided act, or trust the being in her mind, the one he had tried to keep her from. One path led to the continued, silent isolation of her own world. The other led to a terrifying unknown. The thrumming grew louder. The light from the walls was now so intense it was blinding. The vortex on the wall was beginning to stabilize, its light spilling out into the small space. Elara picked up the journal, its symbols no longer a mystery, but a map. A map to a door she could open. "What do I do?" she thought, her voice a plea. "You find the heart of the nexus," the voice answered, its tone now filled with a fragile hope. "You restore the silence, and you bring us home." The vortex on the wall was a gaping maw of light and color, a window into a reality she had only ever glimpsed in her father's frantic, scribbled notes. The purplish symbols on the walls of the vault hummed with a newfound energy, pulling at her like a tide. Her father hadn't sealed the nexus. He had simply relocated it, using the compass to anchor its entry point to a hidden location. He hadn't destroyed the door, he had moved it. Elara clutched the compass, its blue light a beacon of defiant warmth in the swirling maelstrom. The voice in her mind, the one she now knew was a weaver, spoke again. The path to the heart of the nexus is within the loom. The journal holds the map, the compass holds the key. You have both now. You must step through. But the journal's symbols, once so clear, were now a chaotic mess. The words she had understood were gone, replaced by indecipherable gibberish. The obsidian in her pocket was cool and inert. The sudden influx of energy from the open nexus was interfering with its ability to translate the ancient text. She was blind again, and the map was useless. A flash of understanding, cold and sharp, sliced through her panic. The weavers didn't communicate in words. They communicated in frequencies, in a language of vibrations. The obsidian was a receiver, but the nexus was broadcasting at a different frequency. The voice in her head was not a translation. It was a direct connection. The journal is a key, she thought, her voice a desperate whisper. But you are the map. The voice in her head was silent for a moment, and then a profound sadness, tinged with a fragile hope, washed over her. Yes, it whispered, I am the map, but I have been fractured for too long. I cannot guide you, little one. Not completely. A sudden sound from the alley outside sliced through the ethereal hum of the nexus, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on gravel. Someone was coming. She was no longer alone, no longer hidden. The weaver that had attacked her before was gone, but the door she had just opened was a blaring signal in the silent world of the weavers. She was at a crossroads. She could try to find a way to close the door, to seal the nexus and preserve her father's desperate, flawed peace. Or she could trust the fractured voice in her mind and step into the maelstrom, hoping to heal something she barely understood. The footsteps grew closer. A sliver of light from a flashlight cut into the darkness of the alley entrance, casting a long, wavering beam. They were coming for her, and she had run out of time to choose. Elara pressed herself into the corner of the small vault, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the back of her throat. The beam of light from the alley outside sliced through the space, and she saw the silhouette of a man framed in the doorway. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a confident posture that suggested he was not afraid of what he might find. This was not a random intruder. He had been sent. He stepped into the vault, and the light from his flashlight fell upon the swirling vortex of the nexus, its purple and blue light illuminating his face. He was young, no older than she was, with a square jaw and serious eyes. He wasn't surprised by what he saw. He had been looking for this. He was a part of this. The resonance is strong here, he said, his voice calm and even. So you're the last resonant thread, the one we've been looking for. Elara didn't answer. She instinctively moved to shield the compass with her body. The man's gaze fell upon it, and a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not malice, but a sort of weary relief. My name is Kale, he said, taking a step closer. My lineage has been guarding the loom for generations, waiting for the one who could heal it. You were supposed to find us. Your father was supposed to bring you to us. Her father, the man who had given her a compass that acted as a key to a world of silent, unseen beings. The man who had died to protect her from what he thought was a dangerous secret. She looked from the vortex to Kale, her mind racing. My father called you weavers, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Kale smiled, a small, sad movement of his lips. We are the architects of reality, but we are also its servants. The loom is our home, and when it broke, we broke with it. Your father, he tried to protect you by sealing the nexus, but he only isolated you. He fractured your existence from ours, from the very thing you were meant to be. Elara thought of her life, a solitary existence defined by her father's paranoid rules and a sense of otherness she could never shake. It had been lonely, and now She was faced with the truth of why. Her father hadn't saved her. He had cut her off. Why me? She asked, a raw question of her own identity. You're a resonant thread, Kale explained. A rare human with a natural frequency that can interact with our reality. Your father was the same. He was a bridge, a go-between, but he was afraid of what he couldn't control. And so he locked the door. He held out a hand, and in his palm was a small, smooth piece of obsidian, identical to the one in her pocket. This is a key, but it's not the only one. The weaver you encountered in the alley was an automaton, a seeker. It was looking for the key, not the being. But I was looking for you, for the resonance. He gestured to the swirling nexus. The loom is dying. We can't mend it from our side, and our existence is fading. We need a resonant thread to step through, to bring the compass to the heart of the loom and repair the fracture. We need you to come with me. The voice in her mind, the one she now knew was a true weaver, pulsed with a renewed, desperate energy. He speaks the truth. We need you. She looked at Kale's outstretched hand, at the familiar obsidian in his palm. And then she looked at the glowing vortex, a terrifying gateway into a world she was just beginning to understand. Her father's whole life had been a series of warnings against this moment. But his warnings were now revealed as the prisons they were. She had a chance to break free, a chance to be more than a lonely girl with a strange legacy. She had a chance to be part of something vast and ancient, a chance to heal a world and find her place within it. Her decision was not a choice between danger and safety. It was a choice between the silent, isolated existence her father had chosen for her and the terrifying, vibrant reality that awaited on the other side. All right, she said, her voice steady now, all fear replaced by a strange, thrilling sense of purpose. Let's go. Elara took a final, deep breath of the damp, stale air of the vault. She looked at Kale, and for the first time, she truly saw him, not as an intruder or a stranger, but as a silent echo of her own existence. He was the product of a lineage of people who had been tasked with a secret burden, just as she was. He was a keeper of the silence, a watcher of the hidden world. He nodded, a gesture of understanding and acceptance, and extended his hand again. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers wrapped around his, and his touch was warm, solid. A thread of energy, not of light or sound, but of pure consciousness, flowed between them. It was a language she understood instinctively, a feeling of shared purpose. With Kale's hand in hers, she stepped toward the swirling vortex of the nexus. The air around them began to crackle with an intense energy, the sound of 1,000 glass chimes playing a frantic, discordant song. The purple light from the symbols on the walls intensified, casting her and Kale in a brilliant, otherworldly glow. The world of the alley, the city, and the life she had known dissolved behind them. The transition was not a sudden jump, but a slow, vertiginous unraveling. She felt herself stretching, a sensation of being unmade and remade at the same time. Colors she had never seen before flashed behind her eyelids, and sounds she could not have conceived of vibrated through her bones. The voice in her mind, the weaver, was now a chorus of voices, a vast, echoing choir of sorrow and hope. When her feet finally touched solid ground, the world around her was a cathedral of light and sound. The air itself was luminous, filled with motes of shimmering energy. Above them, a sky of fractured glass mirrored a landscape of impossible geometry. Rivers of glowing liquid flowed uphill, and trees made of crystal hummed with a soft, melodic light. This was the loom. This was the home of the weavers. And it was broken. A great fissure, a chasm of utter blackness, tore across the landscape, pulling at the light and the harmony. She felt its pull, a terrible, lonely emptiness that drew a shiver from her. This was the fracture. This was what her father had feared, what he had tried to hide. Kale led her toward the chasm, and she saw them now, the weavers. They were not solid beings, but elegant, swirling forms of light and shadow, their colors muted and their motions slow and pained. They reached out to her, not with hands, but with threads of light, and the chorus in her mind rose in a desperate plea. The heart of the loom is at the center of the fracture, Kale said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. The compass must be placed there. The resonant thread must be rewoven. Elara looked at her hand, where the compass pulsed with a steady blue light. It was no longer just a compass. It was a key, a tool of healing. She looked at the desolate landscape, at the suffering beings of light, and at Kale's unwavering resolve. She was no longer just a girl with a secret legacy. She was a healer, a resonant thread, and she had a choice to make, not just for herself, but for an entire world. Kale released her hand, and Elara felt the loss of his solid presence, the abrupt return of her own fractured, isolated reality in the midst of this broken world. The compass in her hand was her only anchor, its blue light a small, defiant star in the gloom of the loom. She took a step forward, a shiver running through her as the light and sound of the damaged landscape intensified. The weavers, the beings of light and shadow, swirled around her, their threads of energy brushing against her. It felt like 1,000 questions and 1,000 sorrows, a torrent of information she could not process but could only feel. She was a single, resonant note in a broken symphony, and they were all desperate for her to play. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice a tiny whisper in the vast, echoing space. "You must walk into the fracture," Kale said, his voice now distant, as if the landscape itself was pulling them apart. "The compass will guide you. It will only open the way for a resonant thread." She looked at the chasm of blackness, a tear in the very fabric of existence. It was not empty, but filled with a swirling vortex of nothingness, a place where reality itself was being unmade. It was terrifying, a pure, concentrated loneliness. The compass pulsed in her hand, the needle pointing directly into the void. Taking a deep breath, she stepped to the edge of the chasm. The air became sharp and cold, and she felt the magnetic pull of the void, a silent invitation to let go, to simply dissolve into nothingness. She felt the fear, but she also felt the profound, aching sorrow of the weavers, and it was that feeling that pushed her forward. She was not just saving herself, she was saving them. She was mending a world. With a final act of faith, she lifted her foot and stepped into the blackness. There was no fall, no sudden drop. The void was not an empty space, but a transition, a new layer of reality. The compass in her hand flared to life, its light illuminating a narrow, twisting path of solid, blue light that wove its way through the darkness. The path was not straight, but followed the intricate, geometric patterns of the weaver's language. She began to walk, guided by the compass and her own resonant sense of what was right. The voice of the weavers, once a chorus of sorrow, now seemed to quiet, replaced by a single, hopeful whisper. The resonant thread, she is coming home. Ahead, at the heart of the fracture, she saw it, a single point of light, no bigger than a star, a perfect, blindingly white core of energy. It was the heart of the loom, and it was cracked, a hairline fracture running through its very center. She had arrived. The final act was hers alone. She held the compass out, her hand steady, and with a silent prayer, she prepared to put the pieces back together. The heart of the loom pulsed with an agonizing, silent rhythm, a beat of profound loss and fracture. Elara held the compass aloft, its blue light a gentle counterpoint to the blinding white core. A final, desperate thought from the weavers, a collective plea, echoed in her mind. "Place it. Mend us." She stepped onto the fractured core, the ground beneath her feeling less like solid matter and more like frozen light. A fine, trembling dust of pure energy rose around her feet. The compass felt impossibly heavy now, not with weight, but with purpose. The voice of her father, A ghost of a memory whispered in her thoughts. This is what they want. They will use you. But his voice was no longer a warning. It was a plea for her to remain in the prison of his fear. She felt the truth of the weavers suffering in the very fabric of this place. They were not malicious. They were broken, and she was the only one who could make them whole. With a deep, steadying breath, she brought the compass to the very center of the core, the hairline fracture on its surface. As the blue light of the compass touched the brilliant white of the heart, a shockwave of energy, not violent but profoundly resonant, radiated outward. The core of the loom didn't just mend, it sang. A single, perfect note of pure, harmonious energy filled the void. The sound resonated through Elara, a feeling of being perfectly aligned, of every part of her finally finding its place. The twisting path of blue light she had walked on dissolved, and the chasm of nothingness began to fill with a shimmering, golden light. The fragmented beings of light, the weavers, streamed toward the mended core. They were no longer pained or broken. Their forms solidified, their colors deepened, and their silent chorus became a symphony of gratitude and joy. They wove their threads of light into the now-healed loom, and the broken landscape began to repair itself. The crystal trees sang, the rivers of light flowed in perfect, harmonious currents, and the sky of fractured glass resolved into a single, breathtaking expanse of indigo. Elara stood at the center of it all, a small, human figure bathed in the light of a mended world. The compass in her hand was no longer a tool. It had become a part of the loom, a star-like point of blue light embedded in its shining core. A weaver, a beautiful being of shimmering silver and gold, solidified before her. It had a face, one of pure light and peaceful eyes that looked at her with an ancient wisdom. It was the voice that had spoken in her mind. "You have mended us, little one," the weaver said, its voice a gentle hum. "And in doing so, you have mended yourself." Elara felt the truth of those words. She was no longer just Elara, the lonely girl from the city. She was a resonant thread, a part of the loom, a bridge between two worlds. Her father's fear had been a lie, a prison, and she had just walked out of it forever. She had found not just a new reality, but a new home. And as she looked out over the mended world, she knew her journey had just begun. The golden light of the mended loom washed over her, and for the first time in her life, Elara felt truly complete. The subtle, constant anxiety that had been her shadow, the feeling of being out of sync with the world, had vanished. Her senses, once limited, now perceived a symphony of frequencies. The hum of the crystal trees, the silent song of the flowing rivers of light, and the gentle, harmonious thoughts of the weavers as they went about their work. Kale appeared at her side, his form now a steady, human shape, though with an inner luminescence that made him seem carved from starlight. He held a small, polished piece of obsidian in his hand, a twin to the one she still carried. "It's a new beginning," he said, his voice no longer just a sound, but a feeling of profound peace. "For us, and for your world." Elara looked back toward the shimmering portal that led back to her reality. The mundane, gray alley of her city seemed impossibly far away. She thought of her father, of his fear and his desperate need to protect her. She understood it now, but she also understood that his love had been a cage. Her journey had not been a betrayal of his memory, but a fulfillment of her own destiny. "What happens now?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the mended heart of the loom, where the compass now pulsed as a permanent part of the core. "Now, we begin to build the bridge," Kale replied. "The fracture is mended, but the worlds are still separate. We have to teach your people to listen, to feel the resonance, to understand that there is more to their reality than what they see and hear." He gestured to the weavers, who were now moving with a graceful purpose, their forms weaving new patterns of light and energy. They were no longer just a hidden people, but a silent partner in the cosmic dance of creation. The silver and gold weaver, the one who had spoken in her mind, drifted toward them. You are our first emissary, Elara, the resonant thread who found her way home. You can walk in both worlds now. You can show them the path you took. The words settled over her, not as a burden, but as a thrilling new purpose. She was not just a girl who had stumbled into a hidden world. She was the one who could bridge it. She had found her place, not by running from her past, but by embracing a future she had never imagined. She had no idea what her next step would be, but for the first time, she was not afraid. She was ready. Elara looked back at the portal, a shimmering, indistinct oval that promised a return to the familiar. The alley, the city, her old life. They were all still there, untouched and unknowing of the profound shift that had just occurred in a hidden corner of their world. She thought of the people she would encounter. The shopkeeper, the old woman who fed the stray cats, the friends who never quite understood the quiet, distant look in her eyes. How could she explain this to them? How could she show them the vibrant, humming reality that lay just beyond their sight? You won't be alone, Kale said, as if reading her thoughts. He reached into a small satchel at his waist and pulled out a delicate, crystalline object that hummed with a low, soft light. The obsidian was a lens. This, he said, handing her the object, is a tuning fork. It will help them here. The tuning fork was more beautiful than any object she had ever seen, its facets shifting with internal light. She held it, and a single, pure note resonated through her hand, a sound so perfect it felt like a memory of home. This was the key, the next step, not to force a new reality upon them, but to offer a glimpse, an invitation to listen. The silver and gold weaver drifted closer, its form shimmering with a profound, radiant peace. The first step is always the hardest, resonant thread. You must teach them to see beyond the silence. The world is filled with music, but they have forgotten how to hear it. Elara nodded. Her journey had not ended with the healing of the loom. It had only just begun. She had to become a bridge, a teacher, a guide. She had to take the secret her father had so desperately hidden and turn it into a shared gift. She took one last look at the mended loom, a world of perfect light and harmony. Then, with the crystalline tuning fork in her hand and Kale at her side, she stepped back into the shimmering portal, ready to face the world she had left behind. The alley was still there, smelling of rain and stone. But for the first time, to her, it smelled of possibility. The city looked the same, but it felt entirely different. The usual cacophony of sirens, horns, and hurried footsteps no longer felt like a random assault on her senses. She could hear the subtle, underlying rhythm of it all, the low thrum of the city's power grid, the faint, melodic hum of communication signals weaving through the air, and the quiet, almost inaudible pulse of the people themselves. It was the music of her world, and she was finally attuned to it. Kale stood beside her, his presence a calm, luminous anchor in the chaos. He didn't seem out of place, blending into the crowd with a quiet grace that belied his true nature. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice a soft question that felt more like a vibration than a sound. Elara looked down at the tuning fork in her hand. It felt impossibly fragile, yet held all the weight of her new purpose. She thought of her father, of the long, lonely years he had spent trying to hide from a world he didn't understand. She had a chance to do it differently. She had to start with the people who had felt the most out of sync, the ones who had a resonance she might recognize. She led Kale away from the main street, down a quiet, residential lane filled with old brick houses and overgrown gardens. They stopped at a small, cluttered antique shop, its window display filled with forgotten treasures. An old woman with kind, weary eyes was sitting at a table inside, carefully polishing a silver locket. "She feels it," Elara whispered to Kale. "The silence. She's been listening for it her whole life." Elara pushed open the door, a small bell jingling a welcome. The old woman looked up, and a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes, a sudden lift of her spirits. Elara held out the tuning fork. It began to hum, a soft, perfect note. The old woman's eyes widened, and a tear of pure, silent understanding rolled down her cheek. She didn't ask what it was or where it came from. She simply reached out a trembling hand and took it. Her grip was firm, and as her fingers closed around the crystal, the light within it flared, a brilliant echo of the mended loom. The woman looked at Elara and Kale, a question in her gaze that held a lifetime of quiet yearning. "It's a gift," Elara said, "a way to hear the music. You were listening all along." The old woman smiled, a pure, radiant expression of joy. She held the tuning fork to her heart, and for a moment, the silence between them was not an absence, but a symphony. This was the first step, not with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but with small, quiet gifts to those who were ready to receive them. The bridge was being built, one resonant thread at a time. The old woman, whose name was Elara, soon learned was Mrs. Gable, didn't want to let go of the tuning fork. She held it with the reverence of someone who had just found a missing part of her own soul. Her eyes, once clouded with a quiet longing, were now clear and bright, reflecting a light that only Elara could truly see. "It sings," Mrs. Gable said, her voice a reedy whisper. "I always knew there was music in the quiet." Elara and Kale spent the rest of the afternoon with her, not explaining the loom or the weavers, but simply sharing in the new harmony. They spoke of the city's quiet rhythms, the silent songs of the old buildings, and the gentle resonance of the people who walked the streets. Mrs. Gable listened, her face alight with understanding. She had been listening her entire life. She just hadn't known what to call the feeling. As dusk settled, a young boy with his head bent over a sketchbook walked past the shop window. He stopped, his gaze drawn to the luminous hum of the tuning fork in Mrs. Gable's hands. He was a boy like Elara once was, with a quiet intensity and a palpable sense of being just slightly out of sync with the world. "He's a resonant thread," Kale said, his voice a low hum. "Another one who feels the silence." Elara looked at the boy, at the way his eyes seemed to see more than the world presented. She felt a profound sense of purpose. This was not a quick fix or a single act of heroism. This was a slow, patient process of building a bridge, one person at a time. Mrs. Gable was the first resonant thread she had found, and the boy in the street was the next. Elara smiled, a true, joyous smile that reached her eyes. The journey wasn't about saving the world with a grand, magical gesture. It was about showing people the magic that was already there, hidden in the silence, waiting to be heard. The great, terrifying mystery she had stumbled upon in an old, reeking alley was not a secret to be hoarded, but a truth to be shared. And she had just begun. The boy, no more than 11, with a shock of untidy brown hair and eyes that held the universe's quiet longing, hesitated. His gaze moved from the glowing crystal in Mrs. Gable's hands to Elara, a silent question in his eyes. He didn't know what it was, but he recognized its song. He was a seeker, just as she had been. Elara stepped outside, her hand still holding the tuning fork she had given Mrs. Gable, a sort of twin to the one in her own pocket. She knelt to be at the boy's level, her voice a gentle echo of the humming crystal. "It's okay," she said. "You can come closer." He approached cautiously, his worn sneakers scuffing on the pavement. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a way to listen," Elara replied, her gaze meeting his. "To hear the music that's always been there, just under the noise." He looked at her, then at Kale, who stood a respectful distance behind her, his calm presence a steadying force. The boy's eyes, wide and searching, filled with a sudden, profound understanding. He had found someone who spoke his language, a language of quiet vibrations and unseen worlds. Elara didn't need to offer him a tuning fork. He was already attuned. All he needed was a confirmation that what he was feeling was real. He had his own silent music, and she could hear it now, a beautiful, unique melody woven into the fabric of the city. The old woman, Mrs. Gable, came to the door of her shop, her face radiating a newfound peace. She smiled at the boy and at Elara, a knowing, joyful expression. She was not just a recipient of the gift, she was a witness to its spread. The resonant threads were beginning to find each other. The boy looked at Elara, a sudden spark of wonder in his eyes. He didn't ask what was next. He didn't need to. He simply smiled, a hesitant, hopeful smile, and for the first time, he didn't look down at his sketchbook. He looked up and out, ready to see the world as it truly was. He had just found his place in the symphony, and Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning of their song. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The boy, whose name was Leo, still stood there, a quiet sentinel on the sidewalk. He wasn't looking at the sunset, though. His gaze was fixed on the space between the streetlights, on the subtle currents of energy that shimmered just on the edge of visibility. He was already beginning to see. Elara felt a sense of awe. She hadn't given him a physical tool, a key like the compass. She had given him something far more profound, permission. Permission to trust the feeling he had always had, the resonance he had always carried. And in doing so, she had helped him find his own key, a new way of seeing the world. Cale walked over to them, his movements silent and graceful. He looked at Leo with an expression of deep satisfaction. "The first step is always the most difficult," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum. "But once they see, they cannot unsee." Mrs. Gable came out of her shop, her face alight. She was no longer just a lonely old woman polishing lockets. She was a silent guardian of the city's hidden music, a beacon for others who might be searching. She held out the tuning fork to Leo. "You will need this," she said, her voice filled with an ancient wisdom. "It helps with the tuning." Leo took the crystal, his small fingers wrapping around it. The light within it flared, a brilliant echo of the mended loom, and for a moment, the three of them were connected, a small triangle of light in the fading city. Elara knew their work was not done. This was not a quick, dramatic climax, but a slow, unfolding process. There would be more people like Mrs. Gable and Leo, more resonant threads to find, more music to share. And she would be there, a bridge between two worlds, guiding them all home. The three of them, Elara, Cale, and the young boy, Leo, walked through the gathering twilight. Leo gripped the tuning fork as if it were a talisman, a look of profound wonder on his face. He was no longer a boy who looked down at his shoes. He was a boy who looked up and out, his senses wide open to the world. "It's like everything's made of light," he whispered, looking at the streetlights that had just flickered on. "And sound. It's all connected." Elara smiled, her heart full. This was the work. This was the bridge. But as they turned a corner into a busier square, the newfound harmony was shattered by a jarring, painful dissonance. A street musician, a man with a wild beard and a worn-out guitar, was playing with a frantic, angry energy. His music wasn't just loud. It felt like a chaotic storm of static, a raw wound in the city's symphony. Cale tensed, his hand instinctively going to his side, as if reaching for a weapon. "He is not in tune," Cale said, his voice a low hum of concern. "His resonance is shattered." The musician saw them, his eyes, dark and troubled, locking onto Leo's tuning fork. He stopped playing, a single, sharp note dying on the air. "What's that you've got there, kid?" he snarled, his voice a gravelly echo of his music. "Some kind of toy?" Leo instinctively moved closer to Elara, clutching the crystal to his chest. Elara stepped forward, a protective shield between the boy and the man's raw, hostile energy. The musician wasn't like Mrs. Gable or Leo. He was a resonant thread, yes, but a fractured one. His connection to the deeper frequencies of the world had been broken, and the only way he knew how to deal with the pain was to scream his dissonance into the world. "It's not a toy," Elara said, her voice calm and even. "It's a way to hear the music." The man scoffed, a bitter laugh that felt like a scrape against her senses. "Music? This world doesn't have music. It's all noise. A garbage heap of broken promises and lies." He saw the light in Elara's eyes, the quiet certainty that mirrored his own inner chaos. And it enraged him. He lunged forward, not to harm them, but to grab the tuning fork, to smash it, to prove that his cynical reality was the only one that mattered. But Kale was faster. He moved with a speed that defied the human eye, a blur of motion that intercepted the man. He didn't fight him, but simply touched his hand. A gentle pulse of light, no bigger than a firefly, radiated from Kale's palm, and as it touched the man's skin, his rage collapsed into a shuddering sigh. The raw, jagged dissonance that had surrounded him dissolved, replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking sorrow. The man sank to his knees, his face in his hands, and began to cry, great, heaving sobs that spoke of a lifetime of unheard loneliness. Elara knelt beside him. She took out her own tuning fork, the one that matched Mrs. Gable's, and held it to his chest, not with force, but with an offer of peace. The crystal hummed, and the man's sobbing softened, his body beginning to resonate with the pure, unwavering note. He wasn't fixed, not yet, but for the first time in a very long time, he was listening. Elara knew then that her mission was far more complex than she had ever imagined. Some people weren't just searching for a connection, they were fighting against it. And for them, the bridge couldn't be built with a simple gift. It had to be built with understanding, with empathy, and with a patient, unyielding song of hope. The hard work had truly just begun. Elara held the tuning fork, its gentle hum a steady comfort against the raw emotional pain that now emanated from the street musician. He remained on his knees, his sobs quieting to a soft, broken rhythm. Leo, his small hand still clutching his own crystal, looked at the man with a wide, compassionate gaze. He didn't see a threat, just a person in pain. Kale knelt on the other side of the man, his presence a calm, luminous anchor. His resonance was not shattered by chance, Kale explained, his voice a low hum meant only for Elara. It was broken by the same force that fractured the loom. When a human's resonance is strong, they are more susceptible to the discordant energies of the fractured world. Elara finally understood. Her father hadn't been paranoid. He had been protecting himself from a pain he couldn't comprehend. The musician wasn't angry at the world. He was angry at the silent suffering it inflicted upon him, a suffering that he, with his heightened resonance, felt more deeply than others. After a few minutes, the man slowly rose. His eyes, though still red, were no longer filled with rage. He looked at Elara, then at the tuning fork in her hand, and gave a simple, solemn nod of thanks. Without another word, he picked up his guitar, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away into the night, the chaotic static of his presence now replaced by a quiet, mournful melody. "He will find his own music now," Kale said, standing beside Elara. "But the path will not be easy for him." The three of them continued their walk in silence, the air now filled with a new kind of quiet, a thoughtful, sober quiet. The easy joy of their first success with Mrs. Gable had been replaced by the heavy reality of the work ahead. They arrived at a small, empty park. As they sat on a bench beneath a tree, Elara spoke her thoughts aloud. "It's not just about giving them the key. Some of them, some of us, have been broken by the silence. We've built walls. We have to learn how to tear them down." Kale nodded. "The weavers were fractured by the loom's pain, and that pain echoes in your world. The most resonant threads often feel it most acutely. They are the artists, the musicians, the visionaries, but also the ones who suffer in silence. They feel the dissonance, even if they can't name it." "So where do we go next?" Leo asked, his voice small. "Who else is listening?" Elara looked out at the city, no longer seeing just people and buildings, but a vast, interwoven network of resonant frequencies, some pure, some broken. She thought of the hospitals filled with those who felt too much pain, the libraries holding the thoughts of those who sought truth in quiet spaces, the bustling markets where 1,000 different melodies played at once. We go to the places where the music is the loudest, she said, her voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. And to the places where the silence is the most profound. Their journey had just changed. It was no longer a simple search for quiet, receptive souls. It was a mission to find the broken ones, the ones who had been wounded by the world's hidden pain, and help them find their way home.